Hi everyone, today I'm going to talk about the muscles of the thoracic spine, or the T-spine. Before we get started, the T-spine's main function is to help maintain posture while you're sitting, standing, or moving around, as well as it goes through some ranges of motion, like flexion, extension, lateral flexion, and rotation. I'm going to talk about 8 of the muscles that help make the spine go through those motions. So to get started, we'll talk about the superficial muscles. Let's get the pointer. And they're going to be right on this big picture here. So we'll start with the orange one here, which says the iliocostralis muscles. And for all these muscles, we're just going to be talking about the thoracic regions, as a lot of them extend into the cervical and lumbar portions as well. But back to the iliocostralis muscle, it originates at the superior border of the lower 7 ribs, and it inserts in the upper ribs on the posterior surface of them, as well as the transverse process of the 7th cervical vertebrae. Its function is to put the spine into extension as well as lateral flexion. As well, it helps stabilize the thoracic vertebrae while it's in extension. The next muscle we're going to talk about is this yellow one here, and it is the longissimus thoracic muscle. Right there, and it originates at the thoracolumbar fascia, as well as the transverse process from L1 to L5, and it inserts at the transverse process of T1 to T12, as well as the anterior surface of the lower 10 ribs. And just like the last muscle, it puts the spine into extension and lateral flexion. The next muscle we're going to talk about is the one that's kind of medial here in the body, and it's the green one. That is the spinalis thoracic muscle, and it originates from T11 to L2, the spinous process on those vertebrae, and it inserts in the spinous process from T1 to T6, and it helps put the spine into extension. That is it for the superficial muscles. Now we're going to move on to the deep muscles, and we are going to start with this blue one here that you can see starting around the neck head area and moving right down to the mid to lower back, and that is the semispinalis thoracic muscle, or semispinalis muscle. And we're going to talk about the semispinalis thoracic portion, and that muscle is going to originate in the transverse process from T6 to T10 and insert from the spinous process from C6 to T2. And just like the last muscles, it'll help put the thoracic spine into extension, but this muscle, however, also helps rotate the vertebral column. And the next muscle we're going to talk about is moving over to the smaller picture here, right around there, is the rotators thoracic muscles, and they originate from the transverse process of each thoracic vertebrae, which are T1 to T12, and it inserts at the spinous process of the vertebrae above each origin, and it helps extend the vertebral column. The next muscle we're going to talk about, and also that last muscle, the rotator thoracic muscles, as it says in the name, also help rotate the vertebrae towards the opposite direction. The next muscle we're going to talk about is the multifidus thoracic muscle, and that is the red one here. You can see right on the big picture. And its origin is the processes of each thoracic vertebrae, which are T1 to T12, and it inserts at the spinous process 2 to 4 vertebrae above the origin. And like the last muscle, it's going to extend and rotate the vertebral column. The next muscle we're moving on to is the interspinalis muscle, which you can see right around the spinous process here. And it's going to originate at each of the thoracic vertebrae spinous process and insert in the spinous process above where it originates. So you see right here, we'll go to the lowest spinous process in the picture. You can see the muscle, it originates right here, and it inserts one spinous process above. The last muscle we're going to talk about is the intertransversory muscle, and that is as well on the small picture here, right around the transverse processes. And it is going to originate at the transverse process of the thoracic vertebrae and insert at the transverse process of each thoracic vertebrae superior to the origin, and it is going to unilaterally lateral flex the vertebral column. So that is it for the muscles. I'm going to pass on to my partner to talk about the ligaments of the thoracic spine.
Hi, today I'll be discussing the ligaments of the thoracic spine. First of all, ligaments are strong, fibrous connective tissue that connect bone to bone, as opposed to tendons that connect muscle to bone. The main function of the thoracic spine ligaments are to prevent injury and provide stability of the vertebral column. This is done by preventing motions such as extreme flexion, extreme extension, and too much rotation of the trunk. So the 5 main ligaments that we'll be discussing today are the ALL, or anterior longitudinal ligament, the PLL, or posterior longitudinal ligament, the ligamentum flavum, the interspinous ligament, and the supraspinous ligament. So the ALL, which can be seen as the red ligament in the diagram, runs anteriorly all the way from the anterior tubercle of the atlas to the sacrum. So the main function of this ligament is to support the anterior vertebral bodies and limit extension. So the PLL, which can be seen there as the pink ligament, attaches to the posterior intervertebral discs and runs from the axis down to the sacrum. The main function of the PLL is to limit flexion and support the posterior vertebral bodies and discs. So the blue ligamentum flavum over here runs from the lamina of C1 and 2 down to L4 and 5. This ligament is actually more like yellowish compared to other ligaments due to the amount of elastin in it, and it mainly acts to limit flexion, especially in the lumbar region. So the green interspinous ligament consists of weak bands between adjacent vertebral spines and limits flexion. Similarly, the supraspinous ligament connects the tips of the vertebral spines and also acts to limit flexion. Both the interspinous ligament and the supraspinous ligament are continuous of each other all the way down through the entire spine. So one of the more insignificant ligaments are the intertransversi ligament. So this ligament runs between the transverse processes of the thoracic vertebrae. It acts to limit lateral flexion of the spine and is fairly insignificant and isn't even present in the cervical spine. Thank you for listening.